Hello, everyone. Welcome to this YA sci-fi fantasy debut panel summer edition, which as I was making the graphics, I actually realized that it's all like fantasy we're chatting about today. But because of the fact that this is a series, I've tried to remain consistent for now until I forget. And then it will just, all chaos will break forth. Anyway, I am so happy to be joined by these fabulous sci-fi fantasy debut authors. Sorry. Um, I just want to say something quick about myself, and then I'm going to let the authors introduce themselves because I really want to get into the questions that I made up for this panel. Also, though, if you have any questions, then just feel free to drop them in the chat, and I will try to go back to them as well throughout the panel. My name is Lily. I am the moderator, and I am kind of like the face, I guess, behind Utopia State of Mind. So we'll start with our authors telling us about themselves. So, David, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I am David Fraro. I'm the author of The Alchemy of Moonlight. So this is a retelling of Anne Radcliffe's The Mysteries of Udolpho, which is a classic Gothic novel. It invented a lot of the tropes we think of when we associate anything with Gothic. So this has a lot of like roiling fog, deliciously evil villains, crumbling castles, that kind of stuff. But there's a love triangle at its core.
I am Robin Alvarez. I am the author of When Oceans Rise. It is like a Filipino Little Mermaid retelling with no mermaids. It's the butterfly effect. I always have to throw in there are no mermaids in it because what there really is here is a girl who gives up her voice to escape a guy rather than run toward him. And so there's a sea witch, there's Filipino monsters and gods, and it's really a story of healing and trying to learn how to use one's voice.
Hi, I'm Kayla Faye. I'm the author of Raven Song, which came out in March. It is the story of the youngest of a pantheon of war gods who have to protect the kind of mortal world from a hellmouth, which is set in coastal Massachusetts. And the main character's need as she kind of is coming into her powers and figuring out her place with her sisters and with other deities and with humanity as she kind of straddles that line. And it's about growing up, it's about sisterhood, and it's about how sometimes your rage isn't what kind of sinks you, sometimes it's what saves you. And that's Ravensong.
Hi, I'm Sarah Street. I'm the author of A Curse of Salt. This came out like 2 weeks ago, and it's a Beauty and the Beast retelling set on magical pirate ship. And yeah, it's about this 18-year-old girl sort of trying to save her sisters and keep her family afloat, but she also has this like deep desire for adventure and doing something crazy. So yeah.
Okay, I want to start off with the questions, but actually, before I start off with the questions, I want to say something that probably is very embarrassing. But David, I didn't realize that your book was a retelling until you just said it, even though I've read it. I was reading it and I was like, this has such strong Gothic vibes. Like, I'm really digging it. It feels so like Jane Eyre, it feels so much like that period. But now that you tell me that or I guess it was, public knowledge, but now that I found out what is a retelling of like a Gothic tale, it just, everything makes so much more sense.
Yeah, and it's like a lot of people don't know Mysteries of Udolpho. Like, I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to retell it, is it's one of my favorite books ever. And like a lot of people will retell like, Romeo and Juliet and stuff like that. But I wanted to just like introduce people to this amazing story that I absolutely love. And retelling it was like just a cool way to do it, I thought. So the publisher didn't really like push that aspect of it because obviously a lot of people don't know about it. But those that do, get a little extra, I think.
Yeah. If at any time during the panel I'm just like glaze-eyed, it's because I'm finally making the connections and I'm being like, okay, now I understand the name of like the manor and everything like that. So, apologies in advance, but like that's what's going on behind my eyes, basically. I just want to first start off by talking about, one of our main themes is being a debut. So I would just love to talk about what your journey to publication was or were. how your journey to publications have been. And so I guess, yeah, David, you just want to start?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been writing since I was in middle school. Um, I haven't really gotten completely serious about being published until like maybe 15 years ago, but it's taken that long to attract the notice of like a literary agent. Um, so it's been a long time coming, and yeah, it's just been like a whirlwind from there basically. And my first book that I actually signed with her on did not sell. So this is not the first book that I've wrote with her either. So, but I mean, I'm glad that it started with this one because I feel like I have a lot of like, kind of horror vibes in my books and stuff. So this is like an appropriate one to start with, I think.
I got it. I had a moment there. um, kind of like David, it took me 14 years from when I really seriously started writing to getting my first book deal. And my debut novel is not the first novel I ever wrote. It's actually the sixth novel that I wrote. And what's been so great about this debut year is getting to hear how many other debuts actually share that story to publication, because like I think that a lot of us like to hide how long and hard we tried, because it can kind of seem like that meant that we weren't good, that our first stories were really not worth it. And a lot of times it's not actually that. Like, there's so much luck meets opportunity. There's so much you wrote a story that wasn't right for the market at that time that goes into all of this. And it's something that I think a lot of aspiring writers need to hear too. But even coming in as an adult, not an adult, as a debut, and hearing other debuts say the same things was really great for my terrible imposter syndrome, because I was like, I don't belong here with these amazing people. And everyone's just been such a comfort and joy sharing those stories.
So very similar. I have been writing my whole life in one capacity or another. I've been writing professionally for the past 8 years or so. And the process of getting Ravensong published, I started writing it my last semester of college, which was in 2018. And it just came out in March of 2023. So it was 5 years, tip to tail, for this book specifically. Not the first book I've written, but this is the book that I got my agent at, and the first book that I ever had a deal. So it was like 2018. I got my deal in 2020, and then 2023 it came out. So, and even that is like a fairly quick turnaround in terms of going from like book to agent to publication, even though it was 5 years of my life. And so, because publishing timelines are crazy, but yeah, that's kind of the 20,000 foot view of how I got here.
Yeah, I feel like mine's quite similar to that. I started writing this in 2018 as well, and now 2023 release. But this is also the first book that I like properly pursued publishing with. I think it was like the fourth one that I've written. I don't know how people can just like write a book and then it's good enough to ever be published. Like, my first ones will never ever see the light of day. Even this one, I think, like in its first draft, it was like, how did my agent sign with me? Like, I look back and I'm like so blessed. I feel like Robin was saying, it's such a matter of like right time, right place, right market, all those things. I feel like I was just really lucky with how that all aligned. So yeah, relatively quick journey for me, although it has also been 5 years. So
I will say too, when I came up with the idea for this book, it was like 10 years ago. And I would not have had the skills to be able to like pull off a historical fiction novel like this either. So I feel like you do just need to get a lot of like, you just have to write a lot in order to be where you need to be professionally written. So a lot of luck though, a lot of luck.
So, oh, I I am unmuted. So I want to ask all of you, now that your books are in the world, was there anything unexpected about post debut? Because I know that for everyone in the panel, there are varying sort of timelines about how long your book has been in the world. But I would love to know, from everyone's different perspectives, how it has been since debut. Robin, do you want to start?
I don't know if y'all know this, but I kind of had a disaster launch week. So post was it's still kind of lingering. My book came out, and the day my book came out, it wasn't available anywhere. It kind of just disappeared from all spaces and went out of stock in other spaces. And so there was that fire to put out. And then I live in a very small town, very removed from places. So I didn't even have the final copy of my book until a couple of days after it had been born. So here I am telling people, you can't buy it. I wish you could. And then it came to me and it was misprinted. And I was like, oh my God, now I have to tell everyone to cancel their orders of my books. And I did because there were so many things going through my head. One, it is so expensive to have books as your hobby. And I could not deal with the fact that people were spending their hard-earned money on a book that was like unreadable. Two, it was unreadable for some people because it was so small. That was really hard. And then also I was very worried that this was going to destroy my career right out the gate because people were well within their right to review a product that was not readable, that they spent money on, and I was like, this is the end of me. First week, not even the first week. But what was surprising about it all was how sweet and amazing the whole bookish community was on every single platform, because I had to shout about this. I had to warn everyone on every platform, and every book community on every platform was sweet as pie. They really were. They were there for me. They were kind to me. They some of them wanted to buy my misprints because I had a lot. And it was just very special to get to connect with people in that way. So it was unexpected, but and so there are still some things happening, but we're getting through it.
I mean, I will say too that everybody in the book industry has been so nice. Everybody I've met, everybody who's come to events, they've been just like fantastic. I mean, one of the things that surprised me was like I went to the Barnes Noble in Union Square, and I was not expecting my books to be there at all, and they were on the shelf. It was great. And then bringing it up to the bookstores to sign it, it's just like a real surreal experience. And then somebody recognized me, like a customer. So it's like that was just like amazing. It was just completely unexpected, but I love it.
I also, not, I don't think to the degree that you had to deal with, Robin, but I also had kind of a tumultuous debut experience. I parted from my rep pretty soon before, like right before my debut came out, kind of unexpectedly. And so there was, it was a feeling of free fall, essentially, of kind of going through this process like without any real support and without a net. And it was really, really tough. And so I had to do pretty much everything on my own. I didn't have a lot of support from from my publisher. I didn't have a lot of support from my, at that time, ex-agent, who, it was like right before. And so I was kind of just scrambling and trying to figure stuff out while all this was happening. And then on the actual day of my debut, there was a freak snowstorm. And so we actually got snowed out. So I was supposed to do an event at a bookstore near me with another really amazing author, Reem Shakuri, who wrote The Next New Syrian Girl. That we're good friends, and it came out the same day. We were supposed to do this event together. There was a blizzard in March, and it was just... And so it ended up getting rescheduled. The event happened about a week later, and it was lovely, and ended up being really, really great. But the lead up was a little bit tough. And stuff, like I said, like Robin, you said something similar. Like, stuff is still kind of happening, but also at that time I had my sequel was due, so I was like, it was very much like it's like yes, book 1, all right, write book 2, like just like frantically getting right back to work. So the good experiences were really, really amazing and wonderful, but leading up to that was a little bit tough.
I feel so bad for you guys. That's so stressful. I feel like I had a strange sort of release. Nothing bad happened, but it's only been out for like 2 weeks as well, so I don't have much to say about like post-release things. I feel like I'm still like waiting, I don't know, to feel like it's fully out, but it came out 5 days earlier in the UK, and I live in Australia, so it was my publication day, but I was just like at home in my room, and like my publisher's emailing me like congratulations, and everyone's like, aren't you like so excited? And I was like, yeah, but like I haven't seen it in any bookstores, you know, like it didn't feel very real to me, I think, when it first came out. That's why. But I got to have like my little launch here in Sydney as well, so that was really cool, getting to like be in a bookstore and there's like people come to see me talk about my book. I was like, this is crazy. So yeah, it's been cool. I feel like I'm still writing that sort of like just published sort of thing, but yeah.
Yeah, I love to ask that question because I think that so much of before release can feel kind of like super, super high stress, high anxiety. And then obviously, when you have issues, that does not help the anxiety at all. But then I also sometimes I've heard back from, I've been doing these debut panels for a while. And I've heard as well from some people post release that also feels like this surreal kind of like pause almost because it's so frenzied and it's so like you have this sort of impression that there are things in your control, like if you could only do X, Y, and Z, but then you realize after release that like it's out, right? And that it's you kind of have to depart with it a little bit. And I don't know. I think a lot of people maybe aren't prepared for like that specific moment, which is why I love asking this question in these debut panels. I I want to ask about some like or pair some books together for like the next few of my questions. Um, I would love to talk about A Curse of Salt and When Oceans Rise because I think both of your books have this like fairy tale vibe, because we mentioned like Beauty and the Beast and Little Mermaid, right? So I'd love to know if you could talk about how these stories and any other influences that went into your books impacted your inspiration for your story. Like the interplay between those two. Sarah, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not sure about Robin's. I feel like mine is like quite a direct retelling of Beauty and the Beast. It's sort of like a similar story but transplanted in this new like fantasy setting. Obviously, all the characters and stuff are totally new, but I do feel like having those like story beats to follow really like guided my writing process. And obviously, I tried to like make it as unique and different as I could. And I think one of the challenges with a retelling is like try and surprise people, because I mean, with Beauty and the Beast, like everyone knows it so well. It's like you just kind of expect how the story is going to go and how it's going to end, and so you have to work out how to like stay true to the feeling of that and like the familiarity that I think a lot of people look for when they want a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but also trying to make it new. But yeah, I think like I've seen Beauty and the Beast in so many different like iterations, like TV shows, movies, like just everything. So I feel like that gave me a good sense of like what to keep and what to like change to like make it something new, I guess. But yeah.
There we go. So yeah, like Sarah said, hers was more direct to the Beauty and the Beast, and mine is a little more loosely based because there are no mermaids. And my main character is in an abusive relationship. I, as a teenager, was also in an abusive relationship, and one of the things that I felt very strongly about at that time in my life is that wouldn't it be easier to like silently slink away? That if I could just escape, I wouldn't go loudly because I didn't want to blow up my life. I just wanted my life. I just wanted to have my life back. So the voicelessness of the Little Mermaid really resonated with me, because here was this character I wanted to create who believed that going silently would give her peace. And I wanted to show the ways in which going silent in the face of violence was going to really harm her and harm other people who would need to hear those stories and know that they're not alone. So that's where those two ideas kind of joined for me.
I have a follow-up question, which I was just thinking about now. And feel free also to chime in, David, about this, because I think when you're doing like a retelling or when you're doing something with a lot of inspirations, I want to know if there was anything that you were thinking about when you were, drafting this that you were like, I don't want to do. You know what I mean? Like an element from, original or source text or other inspirations where you're like, okay, I don't want to put that necessarily in my book. Um, this is spur of the moment, so I feel bad about calling on someone, but
Yeah, I mean, I will say that it was just like weird. With Mr. Vidolfo, it was about this a woman who was like basically, um, I mean, she was in circumstances like out of her control, being kind of like taken to this castle and villains like having a lot of power over her. So I had to like re-examine that entire like setup. Gender swapping, making it queer. I actually took inspiration from Downton Abbey for the very beginning of my book. Because the setup and basically the ending are completely different than the Mysteries of Udolpho. And the middle and all the like story notes and the scenes that I think people that are familiar with that book would expect are in this. But just like it was a lot of just like kind of rolling with it a little bit to see what the characters were doing. I'm such a pantser that I just kind of like let things go, but there were certain things I had to make sure that I went toward. You know what I mean? To follow Mr. Zibidolfo a little bit at least, and it actually follows it like pretty closely if you're looking at certain story arcs. But yeah, it just had to end up somewhere different. It had to begin somewhere different.
I love this question because for me, I mean, when you say like she gets taken to a castle and everyone is like a villain, I'm like, well, that's what Beauty and the Beast should be. Like, I think with this story, it's so inherently like problematic. But obviously, like, I started writing this when I was like 17, and the first draft was like so problematic. You know what I mean? Because it's just like, how do you rewrite this, but in a way that's like not problematic? And I don't know if you can really. I think like um yeah, there's just kind of that element of it in the premise, but like trying to be like, well, I have to make this guy like a feminist, but also she's trapped on his ship and he wants her to fall in love with him. So it's like writing that line, I mean, hopefully I did it well, but yeah, I think like it was a fun process every draft, making him a little bit less, I don't know, just problematic. But yeah.
The element of having mermaids never occurred to me. Like, I knew I was going in the direction of Little Mermaid, and it never occurred to me to put like mermaids in there. But I will tell you that when I think about the sequel, I have thought of mermaids very solidly. So I don't want to give away too much, but whenever people are like, "Oh, there's no mermaids," I'm like, "Yet." There's no mermaids yet. But it honestly never occurred to me to even make mermaids.
I'm excited. I didn't know there was a sequel. I feel like I'm really bad at like some of the information I feel like that I'm getting off of, for example, Goodreads are not necessarily accurate. I had a few panels that I've done so far where I've like made a question being like, your book is a standalone. And then someone's emailed me back and be like, actually, it's not a standalone. Goodreads just hasn't updated for some reason yet. So definitely apologize to everyone in the past and everyone coming up. I want to ask now about Raven Song because when I was looking at reviews to like do this panel and doing research on it, um, I saw a lot of them which characterize the relationship between Alexandria and Neve as like grumpy meets sunshine, which I thought was super, super cute. And I didn't really think about it in that way until I like saw that in reviews. So I'd love to know if you could talk about creating Alexandria's character and developing her own storyline in parallel to Neve's, because your book is also a series and there's a lot in it about Alexandria as well. That's all I'm going to say, like, non spoilery.
Yeah, so Alexandria comes from I don't really know where she came from. The joke that I have a friend, I don't know if anyone here has watched Teen Wolf, but that like old MTV series, but a friend of mine described her as like female Styles, and I've always kind of just like taken that and run with it because I love that. And for those who don't know, it's basically just kind of like the happy warrior, just like always smiling and quipping, which is like ADHD out the ass. Like that's kind of the whole thing. And so I personally really like that kind of character. And then when writing her, I am always really interested in characters that are hopeful, like to a fault, but also like on purpose, right? They're hopeful because they have to be, and they're like Alexandria is like she's the sunshine. She's like snarky and is bouncing off the walls all the time, but as you do find out, she's dealt with some pretty intense stuff throughout the course of her life, and you find out that kind of cheerfulness and I won't say optimism, but that sunshininess comes from a place of survival, and it's like this is a choice that she's making every single day. And I will say she is probably the most well-adjusted of all of my characters. It's something you see a lot in book 2, no spoilers, but she handles a lot of things better than a lot of the other characters because of a bunch of other stuff, and it's never on the page, but in my head, she's the only one who's been in therapy, and like everyone else like desperately needs therapy. And so she's the only one who's kind of has that sort of like framework already in place. And so she's really good at dealing with Neve's nonsense because Neve is like a lot with a capital L. And so it was really fun writing that dynamic.
Yeah, because what I love, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that it's a choice for Alexandria. I love that. I think that it is so. I think that I feel like a misconception you can have about Grumpy versus Sunshine is that like Sunshine is just how it is, when in reality, when you have things that have happened to you as well, it is a choice, and it's so powerful to make that choice if you can. So, that just like got me in the heart right now.
Well, and also just to kind of tack on, what's interesting is because you're right, like a lot of people do say like the grumpy one is the one because they're like jaded and and whereas Neve is kind of grumpy and kind of just like just like kind of a pain in the ass the whole book, but you find out that it's because her perspective is so limited, and then it's everyone else around her who are like better behaved and like nicer to be around, frankly, who have kind of a more well-rounded worldview, whereas Neve has to deal with like the supernatural things, but that's it. Like she doesn't have a more well-rounded perspective, and so it does kind of flip that on its head because she is very sheltered, and yet she's the one who's like constantly just like angry at everyone all the time and has to be like dragged by her hair into friendship. It was also very, very fun to write. So.
Yeah, I felt like super, I wouldn't say vindicated, but I felt like I identified a lot with Neve. That's why I like loved this question, because I agree with you. Like, we're not always grumpy because we're jaded. We're just like big G grump. Like, my next question is that, Sarah talked a little bit about this as well, but I'd love to know about, your love interests in A Curse of Salt and The Alchemy of Moonlight certainly are hiding a lot of secrets that, your main characters are trying to discover, throughout the course of the book. I would love to know how you balance sort of this sort of interchange between these secrets and like your main character's perception of these side characters, and their sort of history off of their side character's history off of the page that we as readers and the main character also don't really know. And I wanted to know as well, were there any challenges specifically with these side characters? Sarah, do you want to start? Because you were talking a little bit about your beast, quote unquote, character.
Yeah, I feel like this is exactly what Kayla was just saying, like having that character who's so like jaded and like grumpy. I mean, like the love interest in my book is so dramatic and he's all like brooding and everything. And like having someone who just doesn't want to talk about anything is the best way to like not have to reveal everything about them. So I think just having that like I mean, he doesn't share much, so like she has to go out and find it from other people. And then there's the better adjusted side characters who will just like be honest with her and tell her stuff. So I think having those people around him to reveal the stuff that like lets him be brooding and not have to like tell everything himself. So yeah, I liked having the dynamic of like multiple characters around her who are all kind of keeping secrets, but not all of them act so dramatic about it and like aren't so grumpy all the time. So yeah, I think just like having that other people for her to like play off of and yeah, uncover things. So
Right. And like Sarah said, like you know, a lot of like problematic things are kind of baked into that Beauty and the Beast story. With these characters that I have in The Alchemy of Moonlight, like there is a character who is very morally gray that I think a lot of people just like are just want to wring his neck a little bit, and that's Henry, one of the suitors. He does have like a redemption arc, so he's not, you know, he's not terrible through the whole book. But I mean, he is hiding something, and once you kind of like understand his secrets, you do kind of sympathize with him more. And Emil, our protagonist, like sympathizes with him more. But I love writing morally gray characters. You know, if it's, you know, just a very boring character, I mean, you're not going to relate to them. And I feel like Henry is one of the most relatable characters just because he does have faults. He does make like terrible decisions. You know what I mean? So I kind of love him for that. And Emil kind of takes cues from that too, right? He like has his own secrets. And he makes decisions that aren't exactly sound either out of self-preservation because he is queer in this like ultra like conservative like era. So yeah.
I also really like how both of your books, and I think it's very related to the, the question. I love how both of your books also have this like those moments where, when people are hiding a lot of secrets, but I love it when then, like a side character will be like, "Oh, but when that American character did that thing, that's what this is what it actually meant." What Sarah was saying, side characters kind of help show a main character who might not have gotten to know the love interest as much that, oh, this is actually what they mean, like a helpful translator person, who kind of is like, this is what this actually means, even though they have no emotional capacity to voice that aloud to everyone else.
yeah, I love
Yeah,
having
go ahead.
I love having those characters as sort of like a way to get to know the love interest, like by proxy. It's like, well, I know this person is a really good person, so why are they so loyal to this person who I think is like a mass murderer or something? I mean, just an example. But like, she obviously like, there's secrets there, but to try and make the reader want to find out, like to care to find out, you have to know there's something redeeming there for them to actually discover. Otherwise, like, why would you bother? Like, he's obviously your enemy. So I think, yeah, having those other characters there to kind of show that there's something else to find out.
Yeah, and I feel like, yeah, having like the sweet moments with the character, like showing a more vulnerable side does help with like having those characters a little more like three-dimensional. In Alchemy of Moonlight, Henry has a sister, Blanche, and she becomes like really good friends with the protagonist, and she actually maybe became my favorite character by the end of writing this too. But she helped to kind of like soften the blow of Henry and kind of like help readers understand where he's coming from too. So I kind of love that about her.
Yeah, I was 100% thinking about Blanche when I said that. um, I want to ask, because in When Oceans Rise and Raven Song, both of your books have like a contemporary fantasy world vibe to it. And I wanted to know, how do you approach creating and coming up with action or battle like scenes within our world, especially considering that a lot of the things or creatures or like scenarios in your books are not necessarily ones that like we go through, if that makes any sense. Robin, do you want to start?
This might be surprising for people who've read my book, but I am not a big fan of battle scenes, and I kind of have more than one. I think that that's because, though, when I think of battle scenes, I think of these things with like old timey fights and swords, and I don't like that. I don't like that. But I have them, and I wrote them. So I guess when I'm writing them, I always think of like, okay, here's a monster. I don't think I intend for it to be a battle scene, but I'm like, here's a monster. How would I get rid of it if it were me? How hard would it be to get rid of one monster? What if there were 20 of them? And when I'm writing, I kind of just follow. I follow some of the standard practices. Like it's supposed to be action, so let's write some short sentences so it feels fast. But I always try to remember, because I'm not a big fan of battle scenes, that I'm going to start and end with an emotional aspect, because that's the stuff that I love. And if we're fighting for something, there's got to be some kind of emotional connection there. So I think that that's what gets me through them, because I'm like, well, here's what we're doing this for, because I'm not just going to put any battle scene for no reason in there. I don't really remember what you asked me about the monsters specifically, though. But I hope I sort of answered that.
Yeah, I think it was just like how you go about creating them in like a contemporary setting for us, like blending contemporary and fantastical battle.
Yeah. Okay. Well, like for my own, I am Filipino, and so I grew up with my mom warning me with monsters. If you lie, the aswang will get you. And so it was very much real to me when I was younger, to have these monsters in here in a contemporary world, because I believed so strongly that these things were going to come after me. So it wasn't so hard for me to imagine. Thank my mom for that. She might be watching, I don't know.
So I have something similar where Neve and her sisters come from Irish folklore. I have Irish American as a personality trait disease. Unfortunately, it's terminal. It's a whole thing. Anyway, so I have a similar thing where we're not superstitious, but like it is very much one of those things where it's like, if there's a rock in the middle of the road, you make the road around the rock. And it's like you don't invoke the kindly neighbors, this, that, the other, and other things that like drive my roommate crazy, because I'm just like, where's the salt? Like she gets so mad. So I had these like folklore kind of things when I was growing up, and for me, and then I kind of dovetailed that with, I watched a lot of Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a kid, a lot of the CW, where it is these kind of like very contemporary things. And so baked into the magic system for me, and I was like, okay, well, I need there to be a reason for all of the magic and stuff to stay in this town, because for me, the worst part of those shows is when, for some reason or other, the cops get involved, and I'm like, I want none of that. Like, it's just like, I want it to stay in this town, and I want like it to stay very, very like small. And so I knew that going in, because I knew that like that's something that I don't enjoy in this kind of like media, so I needed a reason. And so like I made a MacGuffin for why, like I just baked it into the magic system. I'm like, oh, when there's a fight, there's like this like barrier that comes up, because I want there to be like, like, and there's an in-universe reason, but I wanted it to stay small and contained. And then also that allows things to feel a little bit more dire when the threat of exposure does happen, right? Because it's never happened before. And so like that sort of allows me to like heighten that tension if I already am like doing all the work to keep it small and to keep it contained. But yeah, no, I went in it with the knowledge that just like I need to come up with a reason why like Joe Schmo down the block like doesn't know that there are demons. Like I need a reason, and so I made one up.
Reminder as well, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. I wanted to ask one of the questions that we got in the chat because I thought it was a good question, considering that we had talked a little bit about the lifespan of the book before selling, before publication, and everything. So the question is just, since the books take so long to write, or took so long to write, how did your story change over the years, or like over the time? Kayla, do you want to start?
Sure. So like I said, I started writing this in 2018, and so it changed a lot. I rewrote the ending of Raven Song 3 or 4 times. Like the last act completely, it ended completely differently. Actually, that's not true. The ending was always the same, but how we got there in Act 3 was completely different. And that was completely rewritten about 3 separate times. Everything else stayed similar in terms of like the core of it. It was the ending that really changed so many times, because I had a very specific ending that I wanted, that like I had in mind, and then when a bunch of plot stuff had to change around it. But what's interesting is, because of that really long gap between finishing the book and then selling it and all that, and then when you're actually starting to write the sequel, it's really odd because you're then kind of beholden to narrative decisions that you made like 3 or 4 years ago when you were a fundamentally different person. And also, like, I've written several more books since then. Like, I've leveled up my skills a lot since then. And so going back into this book was really, really interesting because I had to stay with a lot of those decisions, and also like stylistically I had to kind of readjust, which was really, really interesting coming from like writing. I've written like 3 other books in that time, and then coming back to this and writing the sequel was like time traveling in like a really funky kind of way. But yeah, so it was an interesting challenge, and why the sequel has been so hard to write for me personally. People say like, oh, the sequels are tough, book 2 syndrome, and hoo boy, they are right. Not messing around with that, but yeah.
I actually went back and forth between 3-act structure and 4-act structure with mine. That's the biggest way that it changed, because there was a lot of opinions about how this book should start. and so it was either people wanted me to cut out my whole first act, which was a lot of the emotional journey of how you become entrenched in this kind of relationship, and then willing to give up your entire life, or just starting from the moment she was willing to give up her entire life. And people were like, I don't feel like I'm part of her journey in that aspect. And then the other way, they were like, this is too much. It was too heavy for them. And ultimately, I just kept trying to get advice from people, because I knew that it was never going to be perfect for everyone. And it was really written for the people who were willing to go on that journey, who wanted to maybe heal, who'd had my experiences. It wasn't written for everyone. So I had to make a choice there to keep some of that first act. But things did change because someone suggested to me, you need to have us fall in love with this guy. And I was like, the guy that I don't like? I hate that character. And they're like, yeah, you need to show us, you need to have us fall in love with him without any kind of hint that things are about to go south. And then in that, after that prologue of love, throw in an inciting incident in like the end, where we start to see that change. Because he either was, he was always just the bad guy. Like, he was just a bad guy. And so I had to dig deep and find a way to love this character that I hated. And it did turn out a whole lot better than I thought, because people do fall for him right when they read him. And it feels like a betrayal to them, and it's a betrayal to her. And so they connect so much better to my main character, because they feel just as betrayed by the change that happens over the course of that first act. But yeah, that was a big change for me.
I would say for me, it's like, it was weird just because, I did write a couple books while I was doing edits for this book with my editor. So like, I almost need like a couple days to like readjust and start thinking about the other book as I go like between them a little bit, because the book that I was writing for my agent was very, very different than this one was. It wasn't historical fiction. It was like, urban fantasy, like contemporary. So it was almost like whiplash a little bit when I was doing those. And then I also was writing a little bit later my second book that's going to be coming out from Page Street next fall. And that is a historical fiction one during the Regency era. So that was so similar, in tone and stuff like that, that was a little harder almost to write, just because like I had to like really take that moment to be like, okay, this is this book, not the one I'm editing. Okay. But I had it under control. It worked out.
I think for me, as far as the first book changing, so much. I think like now it's indistinguishable. It's like so different from the first draft. But I think like the whole ending for me also changed, because mine was originally the first in a trilogy, and then when I got the book deal, they wanted it to be a standalone, so I had to kind of pare back some of these like story threads that I had throughout and kind of just like make it work by itself. So there is kind of some like loose things hanging around in there that like don't really get explored because they were going to be in later books. So yeah, that was like a big change for me. Also, I rewrote it in like first person. It used to be in third person. So that was a big change. And like I mentioned, trying to make it a little more feminist than it originally was. Because yeah, I think Kayla said like we changed so much from the time that we start writing it. Like I am just a completely different person from who I was when I first drafted this book. So yeah, it's such an interesting process.
I will say I've done that too. I had an agent who wanted me to revise and resubmit. She wanted to go from third person to first person, and it was a lot of work. And she eventually passed on it too. So I was like, oh, come on. But I ended up loving writing in first person. Like I do still write in third person sometimes, but I'm glad that I had that opportunity to write in first person, because it's kind of my default now. It just gets you like in the head of the character a little bit more. You're a little bit closer to them, and I just kind of love that now.
Another question that we have is actually one of my favorite questions. I don't remember if I like send this in advance, but it's a fun fact or like a piece of your world or story that didn't make the final version of your book. David, do you want to start?
All right. I might have to think about that if somebody else wants to jump in first.
Well, I can jump in because I feel like I kind of just answered that as well. Like having this whole kind of world building that I did for it to have enough like stuff to it to make a trilogy. So I had this whole other side of things. That's the whole book basically takes place on one ship. So there's not much interaction between the outside world, and I was kind of like putting in pieces of that so that the world feels like it's there for like another book. But then obviously it all just happens on this one ship. So there's like outside influence, like things that happen that affect the plot and the story and the characters and everything, but it's not really present in the actual story. Like there's no real crossover between like this whole court system that I had, or like the whole kingdoms and all like this map that I had of like this whole world, and it's kind of like cut off now. But it's good because I'm like my next project, I'm sort of reusing a lot of that stuff, so it worked out well in the end. But yeah, that is something that was like this whole other world out there that now is not really in this book, but in the next one there's a little bit more. But yeah,
there was a horror-esque scene in my book that didn't make the final version, but I had pulled out. But I think would have made my book seem a lot more horror than fantasy had it been kept in, because it was so scary. It was like the hospital at night, and another Filipino creature introduced before the main creature was even introduced. And so I think that I might end up like Sarah using it for another book, because I actually really loved it. It just really, timing wise, was like, oh, well, did we need this? And so it did end up getting cut, but it is a scene that I love and will probably get used in something else.
Okay, so I'm back. Okay. So I did have this character Carmilla comes into the story. And in this book there's a lot of like gothic literature Easter eggs, and obviously Carmilla is from, the vampire novel. And she was actually going to be part of like a follow-up novel for this book, if it justified like having a sequel. But I actually ended up incorporating a lot of the elements I kind of thought of for that into my book that's coming out in the fall. So it kind of worked out. So yeah, that's the one thing that kind of didn't make the cut. But on the opposite side of that too, I was like, I'm never going to be able to like retell an Anne Radcliffe book again like this. And since I love all of Anne Radcliffe's books, I incorporated the character from one of her other books into this. So there's this villain, Father Scadoni, who's like this assassin monk who is the main villain in her book, The Italian. And I just kind of like folded him to the story, and I kind of like loved having him there.
So, like I said, my entire third act changed, and so they were supposed to. There's a location change in Act 3 that was going to be completely different, and with that, a bunch of characters got introduced that ended up not making it past the cutting room floor, and including one who I ended up folding into sort of the villain character, or one of the villain characters, depending on how you're interpreting villainy or whatever. And so he was in the third act, and then he featured very heavily in a couple drafts of the sequel, and then eventually I axed him and combined him with another character, which was like a little bit sad, but that way I got to kind of like still keep the essence of him because I really liked writing him. But a lot of very interesting kind of world building was changed, but the biggest change was that character in particular.
Okay, we have another question, which I think is really interesting. I never thought of it before. It says, as a reader, book hangovers are real. Do readers have a similar reaction once a book is finished? I don't know if anyone has a particular story they'd like to share about that.
I mean, I feel like there is kind of like a sense of once the book is done, it's just like, okay, it's just like kind of like a quiet, like, oh, it's done, set aside, and you kind of like, I don't know, it's almost like you have to like start over a little bit. It's almost like a little bit of like, I don't want to say depression, but there's like a little bit of like, yeah, kind of like a hangover a little bit. Like you kind of like miss that world and being in there with those characters. So it's a little strange. And then you just have to kind of like start from scratch with the next one. So I would say that's kind of a hangover.
I get it scene by scene a little bit. Sorry, guys. I'll get it scene by scene. Sometimes I'll finish a chapter and I'll be like, oh my God, I love what I just wrote. Like, and I'll go tell my husband, I'll run to him because I'm proud and he's my cheering section. And some chapters feel so good. And sometimes if a chapter doesn't feel that great for me, I know that I have to go back if I don't have that feeling, because if I'm not feeling it, then I don't think readers will feel it either. So sometimes if I'm not feeling that great, it's a sign that that's something I'll need to revisit. But those are, at my version of book hangover might be a little different.
So I definitely, when I finished, it happens depending on like the situation that you're drafting in. So I got it really bad after I turned in the very final version of Raven Song, because there was all of this like tension of like, this is the last time I'm going to touch it. And like, and then that was going to be it. And so there was a little bit of like a crash after that. Because I was, at that point I was like, well, I'm not touching it again, but I still had the sequel to work on. And so I wasn't leaving the world entirely. But in terms of, like another sort of like book hangover, I finished this rewriting for the third time because of who I am as a person. the sequel, and my deadline was really, really fast. I ended up having to completely rewrite it in about 3 weeks. And so I turned that in on Wednesday, and then I took a sick day. I was like, and I basically just like physically just didn't get out of bed on Thursday. It was just like slept in and then played Zelda for like 4.5 hours just to kind of just get everything out of my brain and just like rest. So that was like a very real like woo like crash after turning something in. So I think there's definitely a writer equivalent, I'd say.
Yeah, I think so, especially like as someone who finds drafting really fun. Like I think when it's a project that you're really excited about and like there's those big scenes like you were saying, Robin, like and then afterwards it's like, well, I've written it now. Like I never get to write it for the first time again. So it is a bit depressing. But I mean, it's also exciting. But I think, yeah, after the last book that I finished writing, it was like one I'd been working on for years and like just being like, oh well, like I've written it now, like I get to edit it. But like, yeah, it is sort of a weird like hangover feeling of like you don't get to go back and like, draft it ever again. So
I love that question too, because I think it's because of the timelines in publishing as well. I feel like when we talk about books that have released or books that are about to release, people are so often writing the next thing. They've maybe written other things in advance, multiple things. And so I do give you all really like a big pat on the back, honestly, for being able to to balance these ideas and like other things that are going on in your head while you are sort of wrapping up or like promoting things as well. I can't imagine like thinking about multiple kind of stories and people and like characters that you've created in your head, basically. um the final question that I have, I want to bring it a little bit back to the whole like debut kind of thing. So I would love to know from you all, what other debuts are you excited for this year? I see some people getting ready. David, do you want to start?
All right, so there's a book called Those We Drown by Amy Goldsmith that I'm really looking forward to. Like a cruise ship, like lots of creepy stuff going on with deep sea creatures. It has a really cool cover. I think that looks awesome. And A Prayer for Vengeance by Leanne Schwartz has like a curse where like this girl was like cursed to be a statue, and then she's broken from the curse like way later, and she's like out in a quest for revenge. That sounds really awesome too. So those are two I'm like highly anticipating.
The Wicked Unseen by Gigi Griffiths for me. I just finished that and I loved it. It was like the coolest book I read this year. I can't wait to like hold it in my hands. I also really loved Priyanka Teslim's The Love Match. It was my favorite rom-com of the year. That one did already come out, but it did debut this year. Both books, I can see that book as like a Netflix TV series. Like I picture that book in my head. So those both mean a lot for me.
I'm really excited for it's called Sing Me to Sleep, Gabby Burton. I think it's like a young adult fantasy that looks really cool. And another young adult fantasy is Black Heat by Bex Hogan. I think that's coming out like next month, which I read an arc of it from my publisher. It's another Hachette book, and it was really good. It was right up my alley. So I'm very excited for other people to be able to read that one.
I'm wicked excited for Psyche and Eros by Luna McNamara, which is a Psyche and Eros retelling, like it says in the tin. And I'm a huge Greek mythology nerd, and so I'm really excited for that. This isn't a debut, but I just got the mailer for it, and so I have to shout it out. I'm obligated by law. So I'm really excited for Where Echoes Die by Courtney Gould, and I think it's the third book she's written. Yes, it is. But it's coming out in I think 9 days now, and I'm so stupid excited for it because she's a genius and I'm obsessed with her.
Yeah, definitely love the shout out for Sing Me to Sleep, which has sirens. I love we were chatting about, where oceans rise, where it doesn't necessarily have mermaids, but as soon as Sarah said Sing Me to Sleep, I was like, that one does have, siren slash mermaidy characters. Um, thank you all so much for chatting. Also, thank you to the chat for your questions. I'm gonna steal that last one, I think, for my future panels. I've left the book links for everyone's books down below, so definitely please check them out. Do all the things, add them to your TBR, pick them up, pick up a copy for yourself. And I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day. And just many, many, many thanks again. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.